Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Now, for this morning, let's get back to where we left off last Tuesday in the book, Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy. I want to back up a few paragraphs to kind of get our minds back in order after the long break from the book. Remember, we were talking about Bishop von Montheim of Trier, the Archbishop of Mainz, and the King of Prussia, Frederick II, and also known as Frederick of Hesse. And the book continues discussing Frederick of Hesse. It says, Frederick of Hesse was one of Europe's richest rulers. Much of his business was handled by his son, Prince William, also a Rosicrucian Freemason. William's specialty was facilitating war. He drafted the able-bodied male Hessians, outfitted and trained them for battle, and then sold them to his British cousin, George, who used them to fight alongside his own redcoats. Every time a Hessian was killed, William received a reparation in the form of extra compensation. As casualties mounted, so did his profits, which he loaned out at interest. In September of 1769, Prince William appointed Mayor Amschel Rothschild. This is, again, one of the most quotable quotes in this book, page 160 of the book. In September of 1769, Prince William, who'd made all this money through his mercenaries, appointed Mayor Amschel Rothschild of nearby Frankfurt to transact some of his financial affairs in the capacity of crown agent. Aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family, I looked them up in the Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered that they bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Vatican Treasury, of course, holds the imperial wealth of Rome. And it says imperial wealth grows in proportion to its victories in war. As the Jesuit empowerment Regimini Militantis Ecclesia implies, that is, the military regiment of priests of the Roman Catholic Church, known as the Jesuit order, he says, the church at war is more necessary than a church at peace. You ever wonder why your Bible says peace, peace, when there is no peace? Because the biggest so-called Christian church in the world is dedicated to war. She makes her money on war. She increases her power and influence in the world by war. And the Jesuit order is her primary war-making militia. The military and intelligence wing of the Roman Catholic Church. They foment the wars of the world. They profit on, they perform critical duties on both sides of every conflict, finance, through their Rothschilds, both parties in the war, making unfathomable wealth, manipulate the outcome of the war, and then are at the peace table to negotiate the peace, the terms of the peace. And this has been their history. But the key piece of information is this, that Mayor Amschel Rothschild and the Rothschild family are known in the Encyclopedia Judaica as the guardians of the Vatican Treasury. They are the ones who invest the Vatican's money. They're the bankers for the Vatican. They're also the ones who run our Federal Reserve System. The Vatican runs our economy. The Vatican controls the money supply in this country. The Vatican can cause recessions, inflations, and depressions at will, just by her influence of the Federal Reserve System in this country. Now, you'll hear a lot of people talk about the Federal Reserve System, but never will you ever hear any of them mention that the Rothschild banking dynasty that has controlling interest in the Federal Reserve System and its agents are the guardians of the Vatican Treasury. And don't you know, if the Federal Reserve System is operated by the Vatican indirectly and controls our economy, they can hold our politicians. They can blackmail our government. That if our government doesn't pass thus and so laws, that the Federal Reserve System can cause financial chaos in this country? Do you see what pressure our politicians must be in? If there are any honest politicians in Washington, D.C., do you see how easily they could be manipulated by the Vatican if they don't perform and pass the required laws that the Vatican deems necessary to create a papal hegemony in this country, a papal kingdom for this country? One doesn't have to imagine long before one realizes that we are all, each and every one of us, slaves to the Vatican. They can bring down our country at will. And that's why the Federal Reserve System can never be audited. And it can never be done away with. Because if anybody took any serious measures in this country to destroy the Federal Reserve System, it would either be replaced with something far more magnificent, or they would foment a world war to reclaim their assets. They've loaned our federal government money on interest rates and then involved them in wars till the point where they can never pay them off. The interest rates on the money is compounding faster than we could ever hope to pay it off, now at the tune of something like $12 trillion in debt. And just on the economic scheme alone, this country is worthless. And it is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Mayer Amschel Rothschild family, who own and operate the Federal Reserve System. And the biblical maxim is, the debtor is a slave to the creditor. And that'll be part of our discussion Wednesday when Brother Nicholas Arthur returns to the broadcast. How have they enslaved us? But this is one of the major strongholds that the Vatican has on this once Protestant land. They have us completely up to our ears in debt, more so than we could ever hope to pay. And now they can literally demand of our government what they want them to do. And it is my contention that the United States is bankrupt, that the Rothschilds have called in the debt. Our government has said we can't pay. And the Vatican says, all right then, you continue to operate in the facade that you've been operating in, pretending to run the country and pass laws, but you actually function as the receivership. I believe that the Vatican is actually calling in the chips. And if the United States doesn't perform, I believe the Vatican could bring, as Eric John Phelps brings forward in his broadcast, could bring forward the Chinese and the Russians and the Muslims and all the other nations in the world that hate the United States to claim their assets in this country. And that's a land invasion. So there's no end to the possibilities that might exist in the future because our government unwisely and directly against our Constitution, gave a foreign power full control of our economy. The Federal Reserve System, there's nothing federal about it. And even worse, it's controlled by the guardians of the Vatican Treasury. And he says, according to H. Russell Robinson's Illustrated Armor of Imperial Rome, Caesarian soldiers protected themselves in battle with shields painted red. Since the soldiery is the state's most valuable resource, the Council of Trent admitted this in preferring the Jesuits to all other religious orders. It is easy to understand why the red shield was identified with the very life of the Church. Hence the appropriateness of the name Rothschild, German for red shield. Now, the Rothschilds' proper name is Bauer, B-A-U-E-R. But they are known as the Rothschilds, simply because they carry the red shield of Rome. It's a historical link to the Roman Catholic Church, even their name, named after the red shield of the Roman militia, the Roman soldiers. The author continues, he says, the appointment of the Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Now, this is a direct implication that the Black Papacy controls the financial wealth of the Roman Catholic Church, and the management of that money falls to the Rothschilds. But it is the Black Papacy that controls the financial wealth of the Roman Catholic Church, and they demand absolute financial privacy and secrecy, and they get it through the Rothschilds. So one step behind the Rothschild banking dynasty that owns and operates the Federal Reserve System is the Black Papacy, the Jesuit order. They're the richest, most powerful entity on the planet. And it isn't just our economy that they control, the vast wealth of this country. It's inconceivable how much financial influence that the Black Papacy has in the world. He continues, he said, who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? He said, I believe this appointment explains why the House of Rothschild is famous for helping nations go to war. It is fascinating that as Mayer Rothschild's son grew into the family business, the firm took on the title Mayer, Amschel, Rothschild and Son, which gives us the notaregon Mars, M-A-R-S. Isn't Mars the Roman god of war, whose heavenly manifestation is the red planet? There's powerful Kabbalah here, and there's hardly an acre of an inhabited earth that hasn't been affected by it in some way. It may never be known if John Carroll and Charles Philippe Stoughton paid a call to the offices of Mayer Amschel Rothschild during their grand tour. Carroll was not permitted to keep a record, and the Rothschild name is synonymous with secrecy. But a call, keeping a close incognito at the House of Rothschild, would not be inconsistent with outcome. The newly designed prefect of the sodality, that is, John Carroll, was designated the prefect of the sodality, chief organizer of laymen for social action, would have a legitimate need to talk finances with the Church's most secret trustee. As things were developing, General Ritchie, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit general, needed an American financial crisis to provoke the colonists into resolving the utter necessity of war. John Carroll's journal reflects that he and Stoughton did enter the Frankfurt, Mainz area, which is Rothschild country, in early spring of 1772. If we suppose they talked financial crisis with the Rothschilds, the outcome of their talks actually did occur several months later. During July, in fact, the British banking system underwent a severe credit reduction. This consequently threw American merchants into an extreme financial distress that did not end until the Revolutionary War itself produced a business boom in 1776. Rothschild, with his access to the Hesse-Hanover vast wealth, and conceivably that of the Jesuits as well, had power to effect a credit reduction in British banking. And Rothschild's profiting from the Revolutionary War is well known. If during the spring of 1772 the circumspect young Jesuit professor conveyed to the powerful young Jewish banker Lorenzo Ricci's need for financial distribution in England and America, didn't John Carroll admirably serve his superior general, his church, and his country? And didn't Rothschild do his client likewise? Even as Carroll and Stoughton were networking, according to my surmise, says Tupper Saucy, networking with Ritchie and the bankers of war, Amiot's Sun Tzu was published. Carroll's circumspection bars us from ever knowing whether he or Stoughton came upon a copy and read it. Did Rothschild know the book? Even if they knew it well, the experience could not possibly have been for them the adventure and irony it is for us now. We open the 13 articles and hear the gentle voice of the man in charge of the papacy's most important business, the man who decided everything, who was in the process of gaining advantage from dangerous and critical circumstances, whose intentions were unguessable, whose decisions were shaping both his own army and the armies of his English-speaking Protestant enemies. The man who, through cleverness and ruse, had already secured the obedience of his enemies in London and Boston and Paris and Philadelphia, although they believed him and his army to be far away and slumped in rest from sustained losses. The man who would win the most important war in modern times without giving battle or drawing a sword, who uniquely knew the day, the hour, the very moment of battleless, swordless combat. Lorenzo Ritchie's voice whispers to us across the centuries between the lines in passages such as these, quote, "The state's most important business is its army. It is the general who decides everything. If he is clever, he will gain an advantage from even the most dangerous and critical circumstances. He will know how to shape at will not only the army he is commanding, but also that of his enemies. Try to be victorious without giving battle. Without giving battle, without spilling a drop of blood, without even drawing a sword, the clever general succeeds in capturing cities. Without setting foot in a foreign kingdom, he finds the means to conquer them. He acts in such a way that those who are inferior to him can never guess his intentions. He has them change location, even taking them to rather difficult places where they must work and suffer. Do not disdain the use of artifice. Begin by learning everything there is to know about your enemy. Know exactly what relationships they have, their reciprocal liaisons and interests. Do not spare large amounts of money. Have spies everywhere. Be informed of everything. Overlook nothing to corrupt what is best on the enemy's side. Offers, presents, caresses. Let nothing be omitted. Maintain secret liaisons with those amongst the enemy who are the most depraved. Use them for your own ends, along with other depraved individuals. Cross through their government, sowing dissension among their chiefs. Ceaselessly give them false alarm and bad advice. Engage the governors of their provinces in your interests. That is approximately what you must do if you wish to fool them by cleverness and ruse. When a clever general goes into action, the enemy is already defeated. When he fights, he alone must do more than his entire army, not through the strength of his arm, but through his prudence, his manner of commanding, and above all, his ruses. The great secret of solving all problems consists of the art of knowing how to create division when necessary. What is far What is far must be brought near. Advantage must be drawn even from losses, and slowness must be turned into diligence. You must be near when the enemy believes you to be far. Have a real advantage when the enemy believes you have sustained some losses. Be occupied by useful work when he believes you are slumped in rest. And use all sorts of diligence when he only perceives you to be moving slowly. Thus, by throwing him off track, you will lull him to sleep in order to attack him when he expects it the least, and without him having the time to prepare for it. As it is essential for you to be completely familiar with the place where you must fight, it is no less important for you to know the day, the hour, even the moment of battle. That is a calculation which you must not neglect. You, therefore, who are at the head of an army, must overlook nothing to render yourself worthy of the position you hold. Throw your gaze upon the measurements of qualities, the measurements of dimensions. Remember the rules of calculus. Consider the effects of balance. Examine what victory really is. Think about all this deeply, and you will have everything you need in order to never be defeated by your enemies. They who possess the true art of governing troops well are those who have known and who know how to make their power formidable, who have acquired unlimited authority, who are not brought low by any event, no matter how vexing. We'll continue with the reading of Rulers of Evil and this clip from Sun Tzu, The Art of War. We'll be back right after the messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS crosstheborder.org to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, keep this broadcast on the air, please support First Amendment Radio, who pays the bills. Now, backing up a few sentences with our quote from Sun Tzu's Art of War, he says, "They who possess the art of governing troops are those who have known and who know how to make their power formidable, who have acquired unlimited authority, who are not brought low by any event, no matter how vexing, who do nothing with precipitation, who conduct themselves as calmly when they are surprised as they do when their actions have been planned long in advance, and who always act in everything they do with a promptness which is in fact the fruit of cleverness combined with great experience. The strength of this sort of warrior is like that of those great bows which can only be stretched by the help of some machine. Their authority has the effect of those terrible weapons which are shot from bows which are thus stretched. Everything succumbs to their blow. Everything is laid low. If you do exactly as I have indicated, success will accompany all your steps. Everywhere you will be a conqueror. You will spare the lives of your soldiers. You will affirm your country in its former possessions and secure new ones. You will augment the splendor and glory of the state, and the prince as well as the subjects will be indebted to you for the sweet tranquility with which they will henceforth live their lives. What objects can be more worthy of your attention and all your efforts?" Charles Philippe Stoughton and Jesuit priest John Carroll departed Rome for Flanders in March of 1773. The journey took them 4 months. They passed through Florence, Genoa, Lyons, and Paris, arriving in Liege in early July. John returned Charles Philippe to his father, Lord Stoughton, and proceeded alone to the Jesuit college in Bruges. Meanwhile, in London, during the month of April, the British East India Company presented the King's friends a scheme which, if measured by the way it would anger American merchants and point them inexorably toward rebellion, could only have sprung from the Sun Tzuan intellect of Jesuit General Lorenzo Ricci. Quote, I demand the art of making enemies move as one wishes, unquote. That scheme, a plan to glut New England with cheap tea, is the subject of our next chapter. So this is the conclusion of one of the most intriguing chapters in this book. It outlines the source of the wealth of the Vatican and who controls it. And if we follow their footsteps, we find out that they control the economy of this country. And John Carroll and his mentor, Philippe Stawerton, toured Europe, and no doubt on a clandestine tour to collect finances to help foment the Revolutionary War. Now, one has to ask oneself, if this is true, certainly the Jesuits had a great impact in the founding of this country. And it's up to my listeners and the researchers who are listening to find out the truth. Chapter 18, the stimulating effects of tea. The East India Company was a major subsidizer of the Jesuit mission to Beijing. The Jesuits, in turn, interceded with Oriental monarchs to secure lucrative commercial favors for the company, including monopolies on tea, spices, saltpeter for explosives, silks, and the world's opium trade. Indeed, according to Reed's Commerce and Conquest, the story of the Honorable East India Company, the company appears to owe its very existence to the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order. How this came to be is worth a digression. Briefly, in 1583, 4 young commercial travelers, Fitch, Newberry, Leeds, and Story, set out from London with letters of introduction from Queen Elizabeth to the Emperor of China. Somewhere east of the Persian Gulf, they were arrested by the Portuguese for illegally crossing the line of demarcation. Pope Alessandro VI, whose mistress, we recall, was Julia Farnese, Paul III's beautiful sister, had drawn the line in 1493 from the North Pole through the Azores to the South Pole. All lands west of the line he granted to Spain and all those east to Portugal. The 4 violators were sent in chains to the Portuguese colony of Goa on the western coast of India. In Goa, they were rescued by a fellow countryman, Thomas Stevens. Stevens had influence. He was rector of the University of Goa, and he was a Jesuit priest. Father Stevens arranged their release, but apparently not without certain conditions. Story joined the Society of Jesus. Newberry and Leeds accepted posts in the Goan colonial government. Ralph Fitch proceeded on to China, evidently under an Ignatian oath. Otherwise, the Portuguese viceroy would not have permitted him to carry on. In 1591, Fitch returned to England, and like Marco Polo before him, tantalized adventurers with the lucrative possibilities of transporting to the Western Hemisphere all the Oriental splendors he'd seen. 8 years later, on September 24, 1599, with a subscription of a little more than 30 pounds, Fitch and several others formed the East India Company. And now, in 1773, the East India Company was governed by Freemasons, whose Grand Master in 1772 was the 9th Lord Petre. His mastery would continue until 1777. Related to the Stawertons, now remember the Rothschilds were Freemasons, were they not? And so was the king's son. It says, related to the Stawertons, Norfolks, and Arundels, the Petre family, pronounced Peter, was highly esteemed by the Society of Jesus. It was the Peters who, back in the 16th century, bankrolled the original Jesuit missions to England. The East India Company's most powerful political attaché was Robert Petty, Lord Shelburne. Shelburne. We recall Shelburne as, quote, the Jesuit of Berkeley Square, who worked in 1763 with Lord Bute to conclude the French and Indian Wars with the Treaty of Paris, which isolated England from European alliances and angered the Americans over the Western lands. Acting on East India Company's behalf, Shelburne concluded with the King's friends on a scheme designed to disturb the relative peace which had existed between the American merchants and England since the appeal of the Townshend Acts of 1770. They went like this. Stored in the company's dockside British warehouses were 17 million pounds of surplus tea. This tea could not be released for sale until a duty of 1 shilling per pound was paid to the Crown. If the King would exempt the company from paying the shilling duty, the company would sell the tea through special consignees to Americans at prices lower than the colonists were paying for either the dutied English tea or smuggled Dutch tea. Everyone would win. The American tea drinkers, still suffering from the depressive effects of the British banking crisis of July of 1772, would win. East India Company would win. And with a windfall duty of not 1 but 3 shillings a pound, the Crown would win. The only loser would be the colonial tea merchants, who had been enjoying nice profits on both dutied and smuggled tea. The King's friends directed Parliament to put the scheme into law, and on May 10, 1773, the Tea Act went into effect. Predictably, the tea merchants reacted in fury. Over the next 6 months, they pressed the intercolonial network of dissident propagandists to help them mount a protest. What began as an injustice against tea merchants was amplified by the propagandists into a widely felt injustice against the colonies generally. Then, on July 21, 1773, Ganganelli, Clement XIV, abolished the Jesuits, quote-unquote, for all eternity. His brief, and many argue that it was a bull, not a brief, but nonetheless, Tupper Saucy calls it a brief. He says his brief of disestablishment is entitled Dominus Ac Redemptor Noster, which is usually translated God and Our Redeemer. We should note that Redemptor also means revenue agent. Considering that the brief's real effect in the long term was a dramatic increase in papal revenues from a new Fabronian America, perhaps God and Our Revenue Agent would be more appropriate translation, if not the intended one. Although Catholic history calls the disestablishment, quote, a supreme tragedy, unquote, John Carroll more accurately appraised it as the quote-unquote secularization of the Society of Jesus. Thousands of Jesuits now rose to secular prominence throughout the Western world in the arts, sciences, and government. Raimondo Ximenes became a radical Freemason. Alessandro Zorzi from Venice joined the editors of the Italian Encyclopedia. Dr. Boscovich arrived in Paris, where his scientific reputation secured him the post of Director of Optics of the French Navy. Esteban Arteaga became a music critic and published a book in Paris entitled The Revolution in the Italian Music Theater. We've already seen how Professor Joseph Ignace Guillotine of the Bordeaux College became the physician who gave France the beheading machine named after him. Adam Weishaupt, dismissed from the Jesuit college at Ingolstadt, attracted the fiercer elements of European Rosicrucian Freemasonry into a new secret cult in Bavaria. His quote-unquote Illuminati, whose cover was eventually blown in order to convince public opinion that evil secret societies were being diligently unmasked, when in fact they were not, was another instance of blown cover as cover. countless other members of his greatest clandestine intelligence agency the world has ever known, now secularized with the jeering approval of its enemies, crossed the Atlantic to help guide Americans through the pains of becoming the first nation expressly designed to be a Febronian, Bellarminian, Democratic Republican church state. That's a huge claim. He said they crossed the Atlantic to help guide Americans through the pains of becoming the first nation expressly designed to be a Febronian, Bellarminian, Democratic Republican church state. What an amazing production, all the more impressive for the complete invisibility of its means. We've seen how the brief of disestablishment was served upon Lorenzo Ricci in mid-August, and how the general was removed to the English College a few blocks away, where he remained for 5 weeks until late September. Interestingly, the dean of the English College at the time was 32-year-old Jesuit professor of controversial theology named John Mattingly. Mattingly was an American, said to be the lone American Jesuit in Rome. He was a native of Maryland, a graduate of St. Omer's, and a dear friend of John Carroll, who, as we know, had departed Rome 5 months before Ritchie's arrest. Within 15 years, Carroll would invite Mattingly to become the first president of Georgetown University, an offer Mattingly would decline. What might Lorenzo Ricci be likely to discuss for 5 weeks? A, under a British roof. B, in the custody of a young American Jesuit. C, at a time when American merchants were incensed at being cheated out of their tea profits by a new law. D, sponsored by British Freemasons. E, whose Grand Master happened to be Ritchie's secret servant. Might the general have conferred with members of the British East India Company, one of the English College's major patrons? Might their discussions have involved to which American ports their tea might be most advantageously shipped, and when? Apparently so, for while Ritchie was residing at the English College, Parliament authorized the East India Company to ship 500,000 pounds of tea to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston, consigned to a group of specially chosen merchants. Might Ritchie have been formulating with Carroll's friend Mattingly plans for a demonstration extended to climax the agitations that had been fomented in the colonies since the beginning of his generalate in 1758? Might he have suggested a spectacular event to occur in, say, Boston Harbor, symbolizing the colonists' frustrations with England? And might not Parliament respond to this event with vengeful measures designed to push the colonists over the brink of rebellion? Aren't 5 weeks sufficient time to script such a Boston Tea Party, along with the harsh legal measures with which it might be punished, as well as how the colonists' violent reaction to the punishment might be coordinated? Outcome suggests that Ritchie did more in his 5 weeks at the English College than languish in custody. We've seen how the general was taken from the English College to Castle St. D'Angelo, with its secret tunnel to the papal apartments in the Vatican. For many months after his quote-unquote imprisonment, Lorenzo Ricci was questioned by the Inquisition, according to traditional Roman Catholic Church history. But the Inquisition had been administered by the Jesuits since 1542. Not surprisingly, the Inquisitors pried absolutely no useful information out of Lorenzo Ricci. In October of 1773, Austrian officials with drawn bayonets descended upon the Jesuit college in Bruges. The officials were Austrian officials were Austrian because Bruges was under the jurisdiction of the Austrian government. They arrested John Carroll and the rest of the college faculty and students. Stripped of his possessions and papers, Carroll was spared further humiliation by the timely intercession of his erstwhile traveling companion, Charles Philippe Stourton's cousin, Henry Howard, Lord Arundel of Wiltshire. The Catholic nobleman escorted Carroll across the English Channel to Wiltshire's lushly rolling hills. On his family's estate near Tisbury, Howard had begun constructing a Palladian mansion, New Warder Castle. One of Carroll's duties was to write his version of the closing of Bruges College in order to help Henry Howard and other English sponsors of the college win damages from the Austrian government. His principal chore, however, was to administer the chapel occupying the new Windower Castle's west wing. In this way, Carroll established a connection with Henry Howard's art agent in Rome, a Jesuit named Francis Thorpe. Thorpe was a renowned intelligence broker, a man whose knowledge of Rome, its happenings and resources was legendary. His apartment was a favorite meeting place for visiting English nobility, and his favorite English nobleman was Henry Howard. Howard had put Father Thorpe in charge of every detail, every aspect of the chapel's design. Father Thorpe and John Carroll needed no introduction to one another. From the editor's notes to Carroll's letters, we learned that Thorpe taught at St. Omer's during the years John was a student there. Moreover, he was Carroll's favorite instructor. These remarkable facts suggest interesting probabilities. From Tisbury, in less than a day, Carroll could reach Benjamin Franklin's residence in London by stagecoach. Franklin, for his scientific achievements and enlightened egalitarianism, had long been the toast of Europe, a darling of Jesuit intellectuals. He was the exclusive colonial agent now, representing the commercial interests of all 13 colonies before the Crown. Benjamin Franklin knew more about America than anyone else living in England, and more about England than any other American. Francis Thorpe knew more about England than anyone else living in Rome, and more about Rome than any other Englishman. And both men knew John Carroll well. And there Carroll was for the 6th month, during which time the Tea Act erupted into the most explosive scandal of the revolutionary epoch, poised in Tisbury to facilitate information between these two personal friends of his, geniuses, institutions. But where's the evidence that anything bearing on the American Revolution transpired between Ritchie and Thorpe and Carroll and Franklin and Howard and the entire Anglo-American Masonic system? We are left with nothing but clues and outcome, which nonetheless emphatically point to a fruitful collaboration. During the night of December 16th of 1773, a gang of Indians climbed aboard certain ships in Boston Harbor, ripped open 342 of the East India Company's tea chests, and threw overboard their contents valued at $90,000. Well, they looked like Indians, and witnesses thought they were Indians, but the big open secret was that they were Freemasons in disguise. Perhaps the most succinct statement on the subject appears in respected Masonic historian Arthur Edward Waite's new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Quote, "The Boston Tea Party was entirely Masonic, carried out by members of the St. John's Lodge during an adjourned meeting." Unquote. Parliament reacted to the Boston Tea Party in a way calculated to increase dozens of rolling boulders into a devastating landslide. Without seriously inquiring into who was responsible and wholly disregarding the offer of more than 100 Boston merchants to make restitution, Parliament rushed into a mass of unreasonably punitive legislation. Closing the port of Boston to trade, forbidding town members without the consent of the governor, denying the Massachusetts legislature the right to choose the governor's council, providing for the quartering of British and Hessian troops in the colony, and ordering that any officer or soldier of the crown accused of an act of violence in the performance of his duty should be sent to another colony or to England for what would surely be a sweetheart deal. To complete the overkill, Parliament passed the Quebec Act, which cut off the claims of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Virginia, and New York to their western lands, and placed these lands, to add insult to injury, under the French Catholic jurisdiction of Quebec. So do you see, the orchestration of all of these events is just too complex to relegate to chance and fate. Someone masterminded all these events. Someone wanted the colonies separated from Great Britain. The relationship between the colonies and Great Britain had to be severed. There had to be an independence drawn between the colonies and Great Britain. And Lorenzo Ricci and his other Jesuit agents and his Freemasons all worked together. We'll see you tomorrow on Inquisition Update.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.